This is Michael Kira. I want to share some ideas with you about how to possibly improve Drupal using a task-based user interface system. And with this task-based approach, I want to explore ways of meeting the needs of a variety of users, content managers, professional site builders, and even casual site builders. So what exactly are we trying to fix? What are the problems? Well, there's actually different points of view on this, so let's have a look at them. From the user interface designer point of view, there's a lot of different ways of doing similar things, lots of different tools to learn, and that makes it a very complex user experience, so that needs to be unified somehow. From a developer point of view, there's some significant changes going on in the architecture. What does that mean? Well, without getting too technical, the old way of doing it was to use a single item of content called a node, and that was the basis for a web page, and around that item would be other various things placed in what are called blocks. But that old idea of building a web page from one single piece of content is about to change. The web is going through a great transformation at this point in time. And what's it like for users of Drupal, especially non-trained users? Well, the problem is it's like this. People get blocked, they get stuck, they don't know what to do, they don't know how to move forward. It's difficult for untrained users, whether they're content managers or site builders, to figure out what to do with Drupal sometimes. Now, the danger that we have as designers is that we could end up spending a lot of time and energy figuring out ways to direct traffic around the obstacles on the road. It would be much better if we could actually find those obstacles and get them removed. These are the two that I think are most important in Drupal right now. Let's take a look at that first one. We build websites inside out with Drupal. That makes it very abstract. This comes from, I think, a legacy of Drupal being built by developers for developers, and they're used to look at things from the inside. But it makes for a lot of disconnected ways of doing things, a steep learning curve, and ultimately it's a push model. And I'll talk about what that means a bit later, but how do we get rid of this inside-out problem? Well, we need fewer abstract concepts. We need to look at site building from the outside, and that means looking at it from the point of view of most users. They see it as things on a screen. We also need to then explore things like in-place editing, because that's an outside point of view. And even further outside is the notion of looking at a website from the point of view of its business intent. Why does it exist? What's it there for? And that brings us to the second major obstacle, abstract URLs. A URL, of course, is a path or a web address. A typical path form for Drupal is this node/123, where 123 represents a unique identifier for a node or a piece of content. But it really has no meaning from the point of view of business intent. It's sort of an implementation aspect that's leaking out into the user's consciousness. And even though Drupal developers are all used to this form of path, it still represents a significant gap between the awareness or consciousness of the client and the way in which the site comes into being. It becomes an abstraction that the client can't really think in terms of. They cannot express what they want for the site in terms of node/this or that. And a lot of clients can really express that quite clearly, even if it is on a napkin or a piece of paper. They can write down what they want for the various pages. They can describe it from the outside. And I think developers, either professional or people building a site for themselves, can also think of the site from this point of view. What is that overall space that the information architecture is making? It is a very important space that we have to keep in mind. And you can look at a website like this as two distinct halves. The front end that the public sees, that most clients will think of when they think of the website, and then the back end where all those complex technical administrative things happen. And I think most of the problems for usability with Drupal happen because non-trained users end up in that back end IA space and they just don't know what to do there. And the solution is to have an outside-in approach to the interaction where all that control and editing and so on can be done in place in the front-end information architecture space where people can see what's going on. Now, the Spark initiative run by Acquia is a case where that's being explored.
So what you're looking at here is this is our first version of our edit in place prototype. This is just
the demo shows some pretty exciting user interface concepts for in-place editing. As you look at it, I want you to just pay attention to the buttons that control the state of the user interface.
Just toggle into edit mode. And what edit mode does...
Also,
is
with
it
this in-place
literally
editing
always
approach, notice how different elements are selectable or identifiable through the user's actions, where they place the mouse, where they click.
If I hover out of the title field onto the actual node itself, you can see that it outlines here, and there's two different buttons I can click here. One is for full article. This will basically take me to a node edit page, where I can edit all of the...
Also, notice how control of these identifiable areas is placed into buttons that are located right on those areas, so it's localized to that part of the screen itself.
And then if I click into the field, that instantly changes to a save or a cancel button. And by typing, the save button becomes active, and I can either save my changes or I can choose...
And there's something very attractive about the idea of localized control, because it's right there where the user's looking and it's easy to spot it. But there are also some drawbacks that we have to watch out for, and that has to do with how much of this control can you actually fit on the screen in an in-place editing kind of mode. There's only so much you can do without disrupting the original look of the page, and as in-place editing you want to keep that disruption to a minimum. Let's see how it works out.
Body field works the same. What we're planning to do here is have an actual toolbar here. You can do bold and italics.
So in this instance, if there is a WYSIWYG bar, it's definitely going to be constrained by the width of the element that it's operating on, and that width can vary. So there is potentially a landmine there in terms of usability or in terms of implementation, because it might not be physically possible to fit that kind of bar in all contexts. So what I'm going to do is look at ways in which that kind of problem can be resolved a different way. And that involves building a kind of a universal user interface mechanism to handle these kinds of use cases or these kinds of needs. Going to switch gears now. I want to change the music and let the left brain have a bit of a break, take a back seat. We want the right brain to wake up and start to envision what might be possible with an integrated, task-oriented user interface system. We want to be able to bring the tools we need to fulfill certain roles into the context where we're going to use them for in-place editing. And these roles can be organized into groups: front page management, content management, component management. And if we want to do in-place editing, we need to create the place to do the editing in. We need that information architecture. So let's build some placeholder pages. We know we can do this because the client has told us what they want, and we've worked out with them what they want. We know the information architecture. We don't have the content, we just know where it should be. So let's create placeholder pages. If the list gets too big, we'll filter it down and just see the ones that we want to see. So it doesn't have to be unwieldy. We can just work with the pages that we care about. And once we've got that IA space defined, then we can go to the home page and start to build the site. But we're going to need some more tools. First of all, we don't need that navigation menu. That's a developer menu. It confuses users. Let's see if we can find a better way to provide all that functionality and that navigation for developers, and also for new users that want to build their own sites, and also for content managers. We have a shortcut bar. It's not terribly useful. We can turn it into something more useful. We make it into a taskbar. The taskbar contains role switches. We have role switches all over the place. The view, the edit buttons, those are role switches. But these ones are organized into task objectives. These task objectives are the real roles that people play when they're working with the site. And the tools they need are put into the toolbox to the left. This taskbar and this toolbox allow us to bring certain key administrative functionality into the front end, so we can do it in place. And we organize these groups under the hub menu behind the circular icon there, and we choose which set of task objectives we want to work with. And if we want to edit content in place, we go to that task, and we can select things the way that we did in Spark. And when we select something, it can be treated with styles. The style buttons appear in the toolbox where we need them. If we want to do managing layouts, those controls can also appear in the toolbox at the left. And if we want to populate the layouts, those tools will appear. Again, it's all in place. We're not in the administrative interface here, we're in the front end, but it looks different because we are doing different things, and we've indicated that with the role switch on the taskbar. And now we're going to populate a region with fixed content, the static node. We've picked the content type, we've picked a keyword, we've picked the node we want, we put it into that region. We want to work with fields, we switch over to the fields for this component type. We're going to put just the title into the region. And now we can do interesting things with this, because that's given us a context. We're going to make dependent components, pieces that will relate to that title. We're going to go find the body that relates to that title, and we're going to put that in a component just underneath the title. And with that structure beginning to emerge, we can see some interesting things happening. We can build complex structures with these dependent components. We can populate all the regions. We can choose regions and put different things in there, and they can relate to components in other regions. So an entire page archetype can be created in this way. And the users only had to select things that they can see and understand, nothing abstract. And they've built this structure. And we can do things with structures like this. Okay, it's time to wake up that left brain again and do a little bit of logical thinking. I'm going to think a bit about component patterns, how we can arrange components in ways that can be reusable. So a component is really a special kind of block, a super block, and it brings content into a layout, into a region, and it does it on the basis of 3 different kinds of context. So there's 3 different kinds of components. So contextual information can come from the path, from the URL, as an argument, or from a fixed setting, that would be, say, the node ID. A component can also retrieve content through a dynamic mechanism like a view, and it can take an argument, feed it to the view, and pull up a particular node. And when it gets really interesting is when it can actually pull information from another component through a relationship. So comments coming from a particular node can be shown in the same region or in any region, and it's always related. Whatever the node that is, the right comments will show up because of that relationship. And there can be more than one relationship to a particular component. So many things can be tied to one parent. So using this kind of relationship connection, you can tie different components together across regions. And you could have one or more hierarchies of connection like this coming from parents, and if you change the configuration of that parent, all of the derived content underneath it will change. So these relationships can be structured into reusable patterns, all driven by those key parent components. So by giving them descriptive names and saving them, we can bring them back for use again in different ways. Now, where would we use such things? Well, in a page management context, we can paint the information architecture with these structures. So rather than push content into an information architecture through a node form using a menu or an alias, we can actually pull the content we want into the page location that we want it at through the use of a form like this, which comes up If that page is deemed to be empty with no content, it comes up automatically and says, you need this kind of content here, which would you like? And you put it in. Not much training is required for that.